Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. Make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. Today, we're going to be covering what happened in, I believe it was Nashville, Tennessee, correct?
Yep.
The Young Republican National Convention. Now, this was something that developed over the past couple of the past week or so, the past couple of days. And go ahead, Michael, and kind of give us a brief overview of what happened. Obviously, I saw that a bunch of stuff on Twitter, a lot of uprising was going on about the chair election. So go ahead and give kind of a brief overview of what happened there, and then we'll go ahead and look at some stuff on X.
Well, thank you, Lester, for having me on. I was there. I was not a delegate. I'm on my Young Republican e-board back in my home county. I was just there as a guest, though. So I wasn't there to vote. I was just there as an observer. I was in the room the entire time. It was like a 9-hour conference, I believe. We started at 7 a.m. on Saturday. We didn't even leave until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon that day. So it was a long conference, and there was a lot of controversy. I don't know if you want to know the background of it. There was two factions competing. There was the incumbent slate, which is known as the more establishment, kind of like, old school Bush wing of the party,
Right.
led by Hayden Paget, the current chairman of the YRs, who many people are critical of, versus Peter Gunta, who heads the New York Young Republicans. He is considered one of the more Maga grassroots wings of the party. He was endorsed by some major influencers. He was being supported by Roger Stone, Scott Presler, Ryan Fournier, Turning Point Action through Tyler Boyer was supporting him, and it's every major, every major MAGA figure in Trump world, influencer that you can think of was pushing him and boosting him and everything. And he hobbled together a very interesting coalition. He had Arizona, Florida, California, New York, Georgia, like a lot of interesting states were behind him. So, and it was really good to see such a broad coalition. Nevada, Michigan, a lot of the swing states too.
Right.
So there's a very interesting dynamic. And going in, you can tell that the incumbents kind of had a home advantage there, and they used that. So, have you heard a lot of the rumors of what happened on the floor?
So, from what I understand about in terms of what happened on the floor, you had a situation where Nevada took about 3.5 hours to motion them to basically even get seated in the first place. And then the way it worked is that they had a stage and they had people tallying the votes, and they were like, all their computers were faced away from the crowd. There was no like projection of the actual tabulation of the ballots. And then you also had a situation where Hayden was kind of yelling at, people. He was kind of like yelling at, the Florida delegation and different groups. And then there's a lot of different things. But what we'll do now is we'll go through everything that I have on X, and then we'll kind of talk about each one. Like, I think that's
Yes.
the best thing for us to probably do. So the first thing that'll come up here that I'm going to share now is, I believe the first thing I have here is this. So it is this. So it says, I'm going to go ahead and put this on the screen. Yep, there it goes. And it says, breaking, we've just learned that Trump supporters are currently being blocked from voting at the Young Republican National Convention. They are outright barring members of President Trump's slate from voting in the national election. Total chaos. It's Trump's GOP. Let them vote. They are tagged RT, and let them know what you think. The current situation, we have the Trump slate, Restore YR, who have multiple delegates being blocked from voting. The only state that seems to be having this issue. So that's really interesting. And then obviously Grow YR is the more establishment wing, and then the Restore Party is like the more MAGA wing.
Yep. Yep. That was Peter Gunta's faction, the Restore YRs. And I can give some more context to this because it is a hefty allegation. So going into this week of the conference, it was not reported, but just outright said, a lot of delegates, specifically mainly those from states supporting Restore YR, many of their delegates were just unilaterally disqualified, had their credentials taken. A notable example is Kevin Smith. I don't know if you know him. He runs a lot of majority group. He's an influencer. He's one
Yes,
New York. Yep, he's New
I
York.
did see that. I saw his comment because I was talking to somebody before this to gather information, and they sent me. Sammy sent me this. She sent me a thing where he commented, "I'm one of the delegates that got their credentials taken away." So that I did see that.
They did this to weaken the voting power. It seems that they did this to weaken the voting power of Restore states. I mean, there's a couple of other states, maybe from I know New Jersey had one delegate that didn't really make the cut because of some technical issues back home. So there's a couple of gross states that just had legitimate issues, and some other restored states, had a few.
Right.
One or two cases here and there where there's some legitimate reasons to maybe disqualify someone for, I guess, technical reasons. But an overwhelming number of restored states had delegates taken out, and it's for very unilateral reasons. Kevin Smith, this is my opinion. Kevin Smith is an influencer. He's a good friend of mine. He has over 60,000 followers on X. Some of his tweets have had over 1 million views. He has tons of followers on his show. He's an influencer, an organizer, somebody you should want to be part of this conference, someone who should be a leader and be showing what he's to grow a following. But they unilaterally disqualified him and I think over a dozen other New York delegates. Nevada was now an interesting case. That was they went in. They were supposed to have 12 votes going into this convention, but they ended up only having 4 seated and credentialed. So they had 8 delegates. Nearly their entire group was disqualified and not allowed to take their seats. So it was it was interesting when that happened. That was one of the first motions made on the floor. It was a motion made to bring back the Nevada delegates and restore their full voting power from 4 to 12. And there's obviously it was clear through a lot of the body language, a lot of the reception that it was Peter Gunta's faction was supporting this. They were cheering and going on, let them vote, let them vote. And the gross slate, some of them were jeering and heckling and saying, just telling them to sit down and everything, that kind of stuff. Very nasty response for just a legitimate motion.
Right.
Nevada wanted to vote. The motion was seconded. There is debate. There's a lot of going back and forth on that motion. It had to take 2 votes because initially the motion was rejected by Hayden, but then they had to vote to appeal it, and they had to do 2 votes. The first vote, narrowly, Peter's faction actually won that vote by I think it was 11 votes or so. He won that initial vote to override the appeal, to get the appeal through and override Hayden's veto of it. So they had a second vote to restore the Nevada delegates, and it was clear that vote was winning. Anybody who had a calculator and a pen and paper could tell that the votes were there to win because you read out the number of delegates and everything that were voting on this. Now, they are tabulating the results on this Google spreadsheet.
Right.
And this is where the controversy arises.
Right. And this is what happens because then we have this one where it kind of shows, update 30 minutes in, still waiting on a miscount as leadership circles the floor, pressuring delegates to flip votes. So this is something that came up that I guess, and I'll get to something that I have in a bit. This is something a little bit more exclusive because, only this person had this information. And we'll talk about that in a second. But this shows here that, it was kind of chaotic and you just had leadership trying to flip votes in the middle of it during the motions. And it's just kind of a mess. And then we keep looking here. And if I keep going through this, we'll actually go ahead and see this, but we see this, for example, the MAGA grassroots is streaming right now, crowds breaking out and let them vote chants as national young Republicans are called out for blocking Trump's slate voters. And then so you had that going on. And
yep. And so the issue is they had this spreadsheet that's tabulating the results, and let's just say it takes a few minutes to fix it. If a formula issue happened, it takes a few minutes to fix that usually. The vote, we didn't know the results so we were sitting there for an hour and we did not know what was going on. There was people observing, trying to figure it out. We were sitting there for an hour. Then they had us take a half an hour bathroom break. Then they announced, okay, we're going to recess and gavel out for another hour for a lunch break. Everyone's going to have gavel a box lunch or whatever. So and then we went back and everything. So all in all, it was about 2.5 hours of this entire convention was just them tabulating the results in this spreadsheet for the and it was we knew. So here's what the reality was. 2 things happened. They messed up on their spreadsheet, and they were doing. It seemed to be a lot of people. It was very shady. Another thing was happening though. They were buying themselves time because it was clear at that point that Peter Gunta's faction had the votes because he was winning on the Nevada issue. Right. So that's when they spend that 2.5 hours. It's almost they spend that 2.5 hours going around the room, strong arming people, threatening people, intimidating people. They making promises, making deals, wanting and not dealing. And to be fair, the Restore YR slate, like Peter Gunta, they were talking to delegates, trying to make negotiations, deals. I don't believe they made any threats, obviously, but they were making deals. You had Mike Barletta with, Mike Bartels, I apologize, Mike Bartels with New York Young Republicans, speaking to a number of delegates, and they were shaking hands, saying it was fascinating for me to observe, seeing Mike Bartels and Peter and other members of his slate going to people saying, okay, maybe we can get an agreement on this and everything. Maybe we count your vote for this. It was like campaigning within a convention hall. It was almost like an RNC or almost like a speaker's vote in Congress, essentially. That's what someone compared it to, like on C-SPAN. Since that vote was open for 2.5 hours, gave opportunity for them to go around, speak to delegates, speak to states, and make, wheel and deal and everything, which is politics. I get it. However, there's a more malicious side to that, which I'll get to in a moment. I think you're about to bring this up here.
Yep, and this is the really bad thing that was found, which is I can confirm why Arson National was rigged by these threats from weak-spined rhinos in fear of losing a fair fight, whether it's through cooked books, intimidation, or shady deals. Nikki Haley lover Hayden Paget, who doesn't seem to care, watching himself righteously take the stage while denying his members an ounce of transparency. Give me a break. And this is something that came up where supposedly he was pretty much threatening to pull his credit card from people that he had basically paid to go to the convention. And so if they didn't vote for, this is allegedly, by the way, so allegedly this happened where pretty much he basically had paid delegates to get there, and turns out they were going to vote for restore, and they was just not having it. And so an hour of that 3.5 hours of the motion was him going to the hotel, basically like threatening to pull the credit card so that they would have the bill responsible of like $8,000 or something ridiculous. Is this year? I was told the Grow YR went up to a state delegation with CRs and told them that they would be responsible for $8K of hotel charges if they did not vote for their slate. The state was ready to vote straight for restore and then split the vote out of fear. That's a vote under duress. Therefore, their votes should have not been counted, which technically is correct. Their votes probably shouldn't have counted if their votes were basically under, influence like this. Hayden went up to the hotel counter after he heard that the state was gonna go to Peter, and he removed his card from the room portfolio and is now a CR is stuck with the bill. That's crazy. See, I didn't even know they got stuck with the bill.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I know about this, because this was a lot of what happened. This was discussed a lot throughout the day. So what happened was, and this is all alleged, this is all hearsay. I don't have definitive proof, so I'll just make it clear right now. I don't have definitive proof this happened. I'll just tell you what I was hearing on the floor, because this was something that was discussed at length. So, and I was talking to, all the both sides about this. So I know a lot of the Michigan people too. A lot of them are very reputable people. I don't know all the delegates, but I knew a number of the delegates that were there. A lot of them were very reputable, people I trust, people who are very intelligent. So I know the national committee person there is a very smart person. So I will I'll give my what I heard. So when I first heard about this, initially on the first vote about Nevada, that's when you can kind of start seeing which states are with Peter and which states are with Hayden. Who was siding with Peter on the Nevada case on the first vote, and who was siding with Hayden on the Nevada vote in the first vote. And so Nevada fully had 28 votes. They voted full lockstep with Peter Gunta's restore slate to restore the Nevada delegates. And that became clear, okay, they're voting lockstep with restore. It's 28 votes, and that can swing the whole election. It was going to be a close election. So so after that first vote, I think people started to realize, okay, this is serious. They got Michigan, all those 28 votes. So then during the 2.5 hour break, people were coming up to me. People were texting, and people were walking around talking about this. I heard this from other people. Allegedly, these the young Republicans of Michigan. I think that it was through some kind of a program or some kind of sponsorship program. This was not Hayden's slate Grow YR, through the national organization, through some kind of grant program. I'm not sure what exactly it was. The National Young Republican Organization, which is supposed to be neutral, by the way, but it was led by Hayden, of course, as the incumbent. They sponsored these kids' hotel rooms, totaling $8,000 in total. And now, allegedly, after that first vote happened with Nevada, where they went with Peter's side, and it was clear they were supporting Peter, allegedly, many of these young Republicans started getting emails on their phone not long after saying that their credit cards were now being charged for their hotel rooms. They had to spend now hundreds of dollars each, totaling $8,000 total. Again, This is what I was told by a number of people. This was the talk of the day. This was the talk of the convention center. And it's not a coincidence. A lot of these people would not lie about it. And allegedly, certain things are put in writing too. Allegedly, certain things were overheard and said outright. This was
Right.
essentially meant to be, if true, this was meant to be a threat, not just to Michigan, but to states across the country. Okay, don't vote the wrong way, otherwise we're going to screw with you. And now, to
Right.
Michigan's credit, like I said, they are very smart people leading them. At least they have some smart leaders. I don't know all the leaders, and there's some smart leaders amongst them. They did still remain lockstep with Peter. In the end, their 28-member delegation split. They were debating it back and forth. There's a lot of deliberation. They were fascinating because they put their votes off until the very end. They passed and came back to the end of the final vote for chairman. In the end, it was 21 for Peter Gunta, so the vast majority still stayed loyal and strong to Peter's restore slate. And then 7 of their delegates end up going for Hayden. They switched, but it's understandable. These are young kids, young college kids in many cases.
Yeah, and they're scared, that they're gonna have to pay this bill, and they probably got stuck with it anyway.
Apparently they're saying they got walked back on and everything. Because look, if this is true, this is very illegal.
Yes.
You can't blackmail and bribe delegates. You can't fly them out, pay for things, and pull it down the last minute. It's vote under coercion. It's threatening. It's blackmail. If this is true, and this definitely calls into question a lot about the legitimacy of this election. Again, I can't verify if it's true or not, but this calls into the legitimacy into question. And this is not the only case, by the way. I heard there are rumors on the floor about some state. I think there allegedly, again, hearsay is a rumor that one state was threatening their members, their delegates, with $500 fines if they didn't vote a certain way. That's a rumor I heard. There's another state I was told was rumored that they had their delegates sign contracts legally requiring them or binding them to vote for a certain
and this is something I wanted to get to as well, because Ohio, from what I've heard from Sammy, Ohio basically binded their delegates. So like it didn't matter how they felt, that any of the delegates felt, they all had to vote for who the chair wanted. And this is something kind of interesting, because if we actually go ahead and pull this up, this is something like super duper exclusive.
I can speak to that. That is actually something a little bit different, but I can speak to that though when you actually pull this up.
Right. Oh, do I not have it up?
You still have the Michigan thing up right now.
Yeah, I may not have that up here for whatever reason, but basically, Sammy overheard a conversation of the Ohio chair pretty much saying that he gets to pick the convention or something like that. He's in charge of picking it, and he just wants to get the place where he can get the votes or something to that effect. And she kind of heard that and was like, what do you mean? And they just didn't acknowledge her. And so the problem with the election is it wasn't just one issue. It was their state proportionality didn't make sense. Like they all used the same formula for all the states, which it's not supposed to be that way. Different states have different, ways of counting their votes. So obviously that screws up the tally of the votes. Then you have the Ohio thing where the delegates bind to the same candidate. Then you had delegates that were disqualified with their credentials. Then you had all these threats. And so all of that combined, when Hayden tries to say that it was a decisive victory, it really wasn't.
It was a very narrow victory. I think it was like 57 votes, I believe. That is
how many delegates?
Out of I think about close to 1,000 delegates total.
Yeah, that's a very close. That's super close. That's not a decisive.
It was very close. I mean, there are people telling me going into this that when I was observing, again, I went into this not as a delegate. I was there just as an observer, and I like Peter. He's a friend of mine. But when I went in, the Peter Gunta Restore faction was telling me that okay, maybe we might narrowly win this by a small little amount. But the gross side was telling me, oh, it's going to be a blowout. It's going to be not going to be close. It'll be a monumental landslide. This is the closest the Young Republican Convention, I think, in over a decade, if not longer, from what I was told and what I've seen. I remember there was a challenge to Hayden last convention, and it was that was a blowout 2 years ago. This was very close. It came down to the wire.
Because Hayden won very easily the first time.
Yes, yeah. So they got, I think, from what I observed, they got very a little cocky, a little confident.
Well, they probably got very confident because it's possible that they had planned a lot of the shady stuff ahead of time. and they didn't expect certain things to go a certain way. They probably just didn't expect the movement to be that strong. So combining those two things, they probably thought that they were going to be able to win kind of easily, and it didn't really end up working out that way. And so what I have even pulled up here is, like, for example, I mean, by the time that you see the gala, I mean,
Introducing
by
our
the
next
time I'm
speaker
kind of like
from the football field to
doing
the
some, but
airwaves.
like it basically, the whole convention, like half the, when they did the gala later during the day, like half of everybody left. Like
Well,
it was
I can speak to that too. So I was at the gala. I was there. I went to it after the voting ended. There was a couple hours where people were just kind of hanging out, changed and everything.
right.
I attended the gala, and it was, I go there just to, no matter who wins, I was going to go. And I will say this: what's interesting to me and to a number of people that were there was that, first, a few things. First off, they were boasting about how much money they raised, and like, oh, we have all this money. We have, we raised up $1.3 million. They claimed, which was their big selling point for reelecting Hayden. But what's fascinating to me is the gala was just very low energy. I mean, for starters, it was not an open bar. I mean, like, I don't drink, so I don't really care. But even
Right.
just like getting a water from the bar was $8. Getting a beer was $8. Like, I got someone a drink. It was $20 for a drink. Like, and you really, like, you have to make like this. You can't just, with all this money you claim you have, you can't have a nice event and everything. They insist on having this fancy Gaylord venue at the Gaylord Resort, I believe, and they insisted on having this fancy venue. Okay, but first off, the cash bar was ridiculously overpriced, and especially for the amount of money they claimed to raise. It was, people, it was very just, they had Scott Jennings as the keynote speaker. He spoke for like 5 minutes at the very beginning. It was very, whatever. I like Scott Jennings on CNN. He's funny on there, but people were also just like, why is a Bush administration official speaking? Was anybody from the Trump administration coming? They didn't really have that many big names speaking to begin with, and it was very clear from the get go, from what I observed and what a lot of people observed. It was kind of like them taking a victory lap the entire time. You had a speaker go up who spoke for way too long, by the way. No one really knew who he was. He said, "Oh, well, whether you supported Hayden and the Growth group in this election, or you supported the wrong group and voted the wrong way, or voted incorrectly," I'm paraphrasing his words.
So they had a speaker say that.
Yep, and it was very inappropriate, in my opinion, to just like,
Yeah, no, that is
they were
inappropriate.
rubbing it in, because yet both sides were coming together. Their store side could have very easily boycotted the whole gala, but a lot of them did show up to the gala to go just support the whole group and everything. But there's very rubbing in your face, and people were getting very bored very fast. There was a long gala. I mean, Hayden gave like 3 or 4 speeches. I didn't even stay till the very end. I left to like after they started hanging out the awards and everything.
Right.
A couple of friends of mine did receive awards, which was nice and everything. I was happy for them. But there's so many speeches from just random people no one knew. I've run events before. When you have too many speakers, and especially speakers that are not big names, like, why didn't you have the governor come in that day? Why didn't you have like one of the U.S. senators come in that day? You couldn't have anyone bigger come in that day, or congressman or anything, someone kind of bigger profile speaking. I mean, if they have all this money they claim they have, there's all this
Right.
great
Then you could have
fundraising and connections, but they couldn't fly in a good speaker. I mean, you have 2 U.S. senators and a bunch of congressmen in that state. It's a very ruby red state. You could have had the governor, one of the U.S. senators, fly in.
and just obviously, we got to wrap up kind of soon, but just to kind of make the point too, you had Hayden say this is utter nonsense, or like, basically it was him yelling. I'll actually pull this up first. This
Yeah,
was him yelling. This was him yelling at the Florida delegation, I believe. So I'm gonna go ahead.
I'll explain this when you play it. Yeah.
Well,
So,
so
context.
before I go ahead and have you explain, he responded to your post saying the following. He followed up and said, "This is utter nonsense. Everyone in that room is pro President Trump." The video of the last 30 seconds. This is a video of the last 30 seconds of a 7-hour convention where a handful of troublemakers tried to stop the overwhelming request to adjourn. Get your facts straight. And then you wrote this, but what's really interesting is now. Oh well, hold on. Yeah, this is what I just read. Right, was his statement that he commented under your post. But then you posted this, which was a bingo card called YRNF Idiot Bingo, which pretty much it was the Grow Slate created these for themselves to play bingo of the other slate complaining about certain things during the election, which is really weird because if you look at what they wrote here, they wrote, "We need an audit, stop the steal, a point of order. This is a joke. This is corruption. I'm never coming back. Make YRs great again." Like, why would you have that on a like if the whole room is pro President Trump? Why would you have a bingo card making fun of people saying "Make YRs great again"?
Yeah,
Like,
they're mocking the slogan. Or if you see one at one point, one of the boxes says Donald Trump would hate this. Which, first off, yeah, President Trump would hate this. Actually, that you have to mock the president, And no, not everyone in that room was pro President Trump. Look, I will say this: there are people who I know who supported the gross slate, who are good people who support President Trump, who are good patriots and Republicans, who just happen to disagree with people on the restore slate. That's okay. But to say that everyone in the room was a pro MAGA, pro Trump patriot,
it's not
no,
true.
there was a lot of people. I mean, I saw someone walking around with this Larry Hogan shirt or whatever. Come on. I think we're a little past that now. You had people there that were overheard mocking President Trump and MAGA and supporters of the president. You had this bingo card. I saw this was handed out, I believe, by some members of the Ohio delegation,
Which
and
is also the state
I
where
saw this. I found this. I found this.
which
I
is
found
also the state that all the delegates are binded to the chair and he gets to pick. So it's like, you know what I'm saying? So it's just, and then, obviously we're getting kind of
the Pennsylvania delegation had. I saw them. That's where I found that the Pennsylvania delegation had these bingo cards with them. By the way, they were, I guess they're given to them. And I will say the Pennsylvania, Rhode Island delegations seemed to be very rowdy throughout the entire convention. They were heckling. They were yelling. I remember during the nominating speech, you have to give nominating and seconding speeches for each candidate. And during Hayden's nominating speeches in the second, they were the restore side was very respectful. But during Peter Gunta's nominating speech, people from the Pennsylvania delegation were yelling, "Get on with it, wrap it up, who cares," or whatever. And then at one point, the Puerto Rico chairman he cast his votes for Peter Gunta's restore slate through his delegation. When he was walking back to his seat, some of the Pennsylvania delegates who were supporting Grow YRs and Hayden, they yelled, "Puerto Rico is not a real state, so you guys shouldn't be able to vote." A lot of them were booing and a lot of them were heckling and everything whenever someone was, doing something pro restore, and it was very rude. And there's a lot of, I will say this too, I can verify this 100% fact. There's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of people who brought alcohol in, bottles of wine, whiskey, other types of liquor, beers, and like whatever. Having a beer and drinking. I don't drink at all, so I don't care what people do. But a lot of people, and specifically, I noticed in the Grow delegations, like Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, a few others, were getting drunk and acting aloof and everything and acting very just obnoxious and very loud and rowdy. Now, I'd like to, for a moment, though, just explain the video that I posted that you shared, the video where he's trying to keep people out. Let me explain that because there's a lot of backstory to that.
Okay.
After the votes were all done for all the officers and everything, and the Grow YR slate with Hayden won by narrowly.
Right.
Some members of the Florida delegation made a motion on the floor, which they had the right to do. They made a motion on the floor. They said, "We would like the spreadsheet that was used to tabulate the results and the results emailed to all delegates across the country, emailed to all of us the copy of that spreadsheet." Well, actually, not a copy, the spreadsheet that he used. We want to see the formula, we want to see the numbers and results per se, just to make sure it's all done fair. That motion was seconded, I believe, by some members of the Arizona delegation. And so they had when you do a motion on the floor for the entire convention, this a 9-hour convention, you're entitled to a roll call vote and you're entitled to debate. You're entitled to have a debate on it so they can explain their side. And you're also entitled to have a roll call vote where all the states cast their votes. And I understand, at the end of the convention, people were tired and wanted to go to bed and go home. But the chairman, Hayden, he said he denied them a roll call vote, denied debate. And then for just no unilateral reason, you can't do that. That violates Robert's Rules of Order. He's not allowed to go through properly. So then members of the Florida and Arizona and California and other pro-restore delegations started, chanting roll call, let's vote or whatever. And Hayden became very belligerent, very angry as I filmed, yelling, pointing at members of the Florida and Arizona delegations, yelling at them, saying, if you do not stop, you'll be removed. I will kick you guys out. And then he just, then he's forced a motion to adjourn it, ended the meeting right there. And so you can't do that. These people just want transparent. They have every right. It doesn't matter if it was even one or two delegates who wanted this. Members of delegations, hundreds of members, were demanding to see the results spreadsheet as anybody would. And I pointed this out. If it takes 2.5 hours for this spreadsheet to be properly tabulated with the results, anybody in any serious political organization want to see what exactly what happened, went wrong.
Yeah, no, that's ridiculous.
It would take me 5 minutes.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it would take you 5, maybe 10 at most if it was really that big of an issue. But it shouldn't. Like, if anything, somebody could have had ChatGPT and had it correct the formula for them and had it done in less than 5 minutes. Like that's not a 2.5 long hour matter.
Yeah,
and the last thing I want
to share, and there's nothing to hide, just show it.
Right, of course.
Or let the vote happen.
Right, and then look at this. This is really interesting. The election is over for young Republican chair, and the more moderate candidate has won re-election by about 60 votes. Peter, what is his last name?
Ginta,
the pro-Trump conservative candidate, won every state that has the majority of Republican donors: California, New York, Florida, Texas, Illinois, and a clear majority of the swing states, which is a lot of where the MAGA base is. Like, that's where a lot of the really strong young MAGA base is. And if you look, he lists out Arizona, California. He lists all the states that he had won. And then the states that voted for the moderate tend to either be very red ruby states where you have this problem where a state is too red or too blue. You'll have political posers act one way to be able to make it because that's the only way they can make it. So you either had those states vote a certain way or you had the blue states vote for the moderate candidate. So even in the states, you can kind of see that. Even just in the states, you can see that there was clearly Peter had the MAGA coalition by far.
Yeah, I will say one quick thing is, in the defense of some of the blue states and other states that voted for Hayden, there were a couple of states here and there that had votes split. Like, for example, Kentucky, you had a delegate, T.J. Roberts, who's a state representative. He split his vote and he cast the lone vote from Kentucky for Peter. Or New Jersey, our state vice chair, Tim Walsh, he was dissented and supported Peter. So you had a couple of split delegations here and there where, like, there were some of those states that were listed as supporting Hayden. They weren't all unanimous. They had a few dissenting voices and delegates who split their votes. But for the most part, yes, that is 100% accurate. And it's very telling.
Right. And just kind of the last thing, for us to wrap this up.
Yes.
Tyler said it might be time for a new YR organization that is focused on raising money, and the swing states, the current iteration is not getting it done. And I mean, after this, he's not going to be able to raise any money because he's going to have to deal with this. And apparently, two things. Number one, that she hasn't come out, which is a problem. The sheet's not out. And the second issue is that according to my, person that gave me a bunch of these sources and, these tweets, according to them, the meeting was never called to order.
That was a big point of order they made in the beginning of the meeting when things were still being deliberated before the votes began. There's a number of points of orders and things they're deciding on. Someone did raise a point of order. The meeting was not properly called to order. I can't say that I heard the meeting get called to order, although I could have been mistaken. A lot of people in the room were alleging that it was not properly called to order. I can't say that it was. I didn't hear it. Right. But they said, but then some of the delegates who were questioning it started saying, "Well, the meeting was being recorded, is it not?" Because I know it was because they played it in the overflow room. So why don't you play back the recording on the cameras and show? And if it's not properly called to order, then restart the meeting and do it properly. But they kind of just brush that to the side, like, oh yeah, we'll figure that out later. They said there's a microphone issue, probably just didn't hear us call to order, that kind of thing. There's also some delegates. I remember there's a delegate from New York, from Rockland County, New York, who said there was an issue how they during the votes they would lock the doors, no one could get in or out. And one of the delegates made a point of telling me that's a fire safety code hazard. You can't just lock people in 1,000 people in a room so they can't get in or out. And there's people who just stepped out to go to the bathroom or get a cup of water since they're there for like 9 hours, and they weren't allowed back in to vote, or they weren't allowed out to use the bathroom. They had to go really badly. So the whole thing was just very insane to me.
Very, very poorly handled. And at the end of the day, I mean, now with this going on, and the fact now Turning Point's gonna now, I mean, I'm assuming a bunch of people are leaving YRs after this, because this was just ridiculously handled. And the point is, not only was the meeting probably not even called to order, so Hayden may not even be the legitimate candidate. Like, there should probably be a new election.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many issues with the way everything was handled in the meeting that if you actually held it 100% fair, Peter probably would have been the one who actually would have won pretty convincingly. Now, not 70-30, but he may have won like 60-40 if you had actually tabulated everything correctly.
From what I've observed, Peter seemed to have the momentum, and he went into that meeting having the votes to win. The problem was that, like I said, many of his states had delegates removed from their delegations unilaterally last minute, and they were not allowed to get in. They were not allowed to vote. Kevin Smith was an example. There's also, like I said, there was alleged strong arming, intimidations, negotiations. There were several states, like I said, like Michigan was an example. I think other states happened where they flipped their votes. Initially, they were with him, then last minute they switched back. A lot of people allege it was due to pressure. So, and if I think in another scenario, Peter would have won again, maybe a narrow victory. But and Ohio is not the only state, by the way, that did the binding. Now, that's not necessarily Hayden's fault. Certain states have binding rules where it's in their state bylaws to force their other delegates to bind to support. Like New Jersey, for example, my state. I'm not a delegate, but this would happen. They bound all the delegates in New Jersey to vote, similar to how Ohio was. And an act of protest, our state vice chair did not attend the state outside because didn't want his vote to be cast for Hayden. And that's an way that some states did some protests and everything. That's not necessarily a Hayden issue. That's more of a state bylaw issue. But again, it was very, that doesn't seem very ethical in my opinion, no matter what state it was. And I'm not trying to bash New Jersey, by the way. There's many states had this rule.
Right. And so, pretty much after everything we've covered, pretty much we've seen that this really played out, in a bad way. A lot of people are still asking questions. And I may do more content about this because this is currently developing. I definitely want this to get out there. And I definitely want, I'm sure you'll share this with people and I'll be promoting this. So, like, if anybody was there, let me know, because I'll interview whoever, I'll interview whoever was there, because I was very interested in this. I had a similar situation happen to me, a couple months ago with an election, and, stuff like that really doesn't, I get very upset about stuff like this. And so I usually don't do news content, and I'm starting to go that way. But since this came up, I thought it was a good opportunity to use the platform to now bring awareness to this. And like, if anybody wants to get interviewed, you guys can message me on X, you can comment on YouTube, and that's, pretty much it. And you have any closing comments, Michael?
Yeah, no, it was a very interesting experience. I'm happy I went to see there's a lot of good people there on both sides, but this was a very, very just fascinating case of just the inner struggle within the Republican Party, the old guard versus the new Maga wing. Right. And I mean, there's just so much potential talent out there. Peter, he was supported. People are covering this now. There's influencers like Scott Presler, DC Drano, Nick Sorter, Roger Stone's been talking about it. I mean, a lot of big names in the MAGA war. Tyler Bowyer, like we said, with Turning Point Action. And there's a reason why people are asking the fundamental question of what does the function of the National Young Republican group currently? People don't really have an answer to that. And there's a reason why that groups like Turning Point USA are now being seen as the new face of young Republican leadership across the country. And I think that we need to evaluate what exactly the role is in the young Republicans. And as long as people are getting disenfranchised like this, it's going to cause more issues. I encourage people to still stay active and everything, because if you're not having vote happen, you should still stay active and just go to the next convention and vote your conscience, vote your peace and everything. Don't be intimidated if that happens. So, but I do think that you're seeing the beginning of the end. I mean, there's a similar thing that happened with the college Republicans, where they had a convention that was similarly run. And in the end, there was splinter groups, and it basically the whole organization essentially died, and Turning Point has taken over since then, with some, obviously some groups here or there. So
right, yeah, and like now you have College Republicans of America making a comeback. They just took over a bunch of federations from the NFCR, and I don't know if I'll do a video about that. I may do one at some point, because honestly, that's still playing out for me right now with certain things that are going on. I still have to figure out certain things with that, so that's not even over yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's a lot of this is still developing, and I believe Politico ran an article. I mean, this is just another battle within the struggle of the Republican Party. You know, getting President Trump elected was one part of the battle in the primary, but now there is, you know, still a very lot of establishment grip on a lot of institutions, and young Republicans is just one small factor to that. There's state, local, and county parties. There's just little individual groups and organizations within the party, factions that, you know, there's, and so it's be aware of all these institutions within the party. A lot of them are still controlled by the old guard, and a lot of them are disingenuous now. They're MAGA now, but they were Bush, Nikki Haley, you know, Chris Christie, Larry Hogan faction just 2 days ago. You know, so keep your wits about you and keep on the lookout. And it's never too late to get involved and start looking how you can take over your local party and just get help get these institutions more MAGA and more red pilled.
Right. Thank you so much for joining, Michael. What are your platforms?
Yes, you can find me on X. You know, I think you saw some of my tweets in this earlier in this video. Michael KC _. So just my name, all one word, and with an underscore at the end. So please follow me on X if you don't already. I post a lot of news and breaking content there, and I'd love to have your follow. So I appreciate it, Lester. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, of course. And thank you guys. Make sure to hit the like button, to subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you don't miss anything like this. And we will see you guys in the next video.
Thank you.